Hello and welcome to this week's Rights in Russia interview. I'm Mary Page, and today our guest is Philip Leach, professor of human rights law at Middlesex University and a practicing attorney solicitor. Until February this year, he was director of EHRAC, the European Human Rights Advocacy Center, also based at Middlesex University, a post he held since the EHRAC was set up in 2003. He has extensive experience representing applicants before the European Court of Human Rights, in particular against Russia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, as well as the UK and Turkey. He researches and publishes widely in the field of international human rights law. He is vice chair of the European Implementation Network. He's the author of Taking a Case to the European Court of Human Rights, 4th edition, Oxford University Press, 2017, if you want to get a copy. In 2015, Leach was named Human Rights Lawyer of the Year by the Law Society of England and Wales. Welcome to Rights in Russia, Philip.
Thank you very much, Mary.
For nearly 20 years, you headed the European Human Rights Advocacy Center. If you had to sum up in a few words what this organization does, what would you say?
It works very closely with human rights NGOs and human rights lawyers in the countries you mentioned, Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, to bring international human rights cases. So it both supports the NGOs, the local NGOs in doing that, and provides redress to people who can't get redress often from the domestic courts. The remit of EHRAC is very broad, from cases arising out of the various conflicts in the region to free expression, freedom of protest, to domestic violence, to deaths in custody, a whole range of issues.
In a recent article, you wrote that the brutal, unprovoked, and illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine, which started on the 24th of February, 2022, has resulted in the swift utilization of the machinery of international law. Could you summarize what has been happening in terms of international law with regard to Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
Yeah, there's been a lot going on, and really three main areas. The first is that Ukraine took a case to the International Court of Justice, and the International Court of Justice has already issued provisional measures, a sort of a kind of injunction to require Russia to stop the invasion, stop the hostilities. The second is the role of the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court has already opened an investigation, and 41 states, 41 members of the Rome Statute to the Criminal Court have referred the issue to the Criminal Court. And so that investigation will now proceed. It's important to say that the International Criminal Court can investigate war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, but in this particular situation, it can't investigate the particular crime of aggression. So the actual invasion and the bringing of the opening of war against Ukraine can't be investigated by the ICC. So for that reason, there have been separate calls to set up some kind of separate tribunal which has the specific power to investigate the crime of aggression, the invasion. And then thirdly, the European Court of Human Rights. Ukraine also took an interstate case to the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Court has also issued interim measures similar to the International Court of Justice, sort of provisional injunctive measures, which require the Russian authorities to stop targeting civilians and civilian objects.
So there are 4 courts, 4 possible courts that might be looking at this situation.
Yes, yeah, the 3 already, and the idea of setting up a separate tribunal in some way. There are different proposals about how that could be done to investigate the crime of aggression, which otherwise won't be investigated.
So Russia has now been expelled from the Council of Europe as of the 16th of March. And as you noted in your article, quote, until now, no state has ever been expelled from that organization. This is surely a turning point in the human rights architecture of the European continent. Was there any alternative to this turn of events?
I think probably not, given the gravity of what's happened in terms of the invasion. We are in completely uncharted territory in terms of the Council of Europe. Only one state, no state has ever been expelled before. Only one state has withdrawn, and that was Greece in 1969 under a military junta, and then Greece came back in 1974 when the military junta was no longer in power. So we are in uncharted territory. I think it's reflected in the confusion actually about what would happen to Russia and how it would leave the Council of Europe, whether it had withdrawn or denounced the convention or whether it would be expelled. There was a lot of confusion about that. I think that's been clarified now that Russia has been expelled by the Committee of Ministers, and therefore it's no longer part of the Council of Europe. But we also know now the court has clarified that it will be subject to the jurisdiction of the court until September. So effectively another 6 months, it will be possible to challenge Russia at the European Court of Human Rights.
And so let's think now about the people in Russia that you've been working with at EHRAC. What will be the consequences for Russia's departure for those litigants before the court? So there may be three kinds whose cases, there's those whose cases have already been subject to judgment, but which have not been implemented, those who've made applications, and those which may still want to bring cases to the court. How do those differ in terms of the future?
Yeah, the formal position is now clear. The court continues to have jurisdiction in relation to all cases that were pending against Russia, and there were something like 18,000 in the last couple of months. And it will also have jurisdiction in relation to any case that's submitted in relation to violations up to September this year. So the court, it will be possible to make those complaints. The court will adjudicate on them as a matter of law. What's much harder to say, of course, is to what extent Russia will engage with that process. But whatever Russia does or doesn't do, it will be possible to take cases up to September, and the court will have jurisdiction to issue its judgments.
Will there need to be a Russian judge at the court for these cases?
Well, I think the position, I mean, the European Convention on Human Rights says that there has to be the same number of judges as state parties. So we do have a full complement of judges. So from September, certainly we can't have a Russian judge. But also there's a little bit of a contradiction, because the convention and the rules require there to be ordinarily to be a Russian judge sitting in cases relating to Russia, and the court can appoint ad hoc judges when there isn't a Russian judge available. So we might have to see in future the court appointing ad hoc judges in cases relating to Russia once, as I think will happen. The Russian judge is no longer there, but it's not entirely clear, and the court hasn't yet come out to clarify that situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In your article, you quote the Russian human rights lawyer Karina Moskalenko, who called Russians' inability to petition the European Court, quote, a punishment for ordinary people, not the government. Do you have any sympathy with that view?
Very much, Mary. I think she's absolutely right. And my position over the years has always been to argue that we need to keep states within the Council of Europe, keep them within the club, so that they have some measure of accountability, so that we can use these systems of redress in order to get justice for victims of human rights. And there's been, of course, discussions about states like Turkey, states like Azerbaijan, as well as Russia. What should we do when there's such grave violations and a failure, often a huge failure to implement judgments? Well, my general position would be to keep states in, because you can engage them, you can get, as I say, some justice, some measure of accountability, imperfect as it may be. So I have huge sympathy for Corinna's position. She's right. It will mean that after September, it will no longer be possible for Russians to complain to the European Court of Human Rights. And I know from the work that EHRAC's done in the last 20 years that it's such an important avenue for people in Russia who can't otherwise get redress from domestic courts. So I can understand, of course, why this has been done, and but I have huge sympathy with Corinna's position too.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned before that the European Court ordered interim measures, right, against Russia. Could you tell us what those interim measures are, and what will be the impact of Russia's being expelled on this particular case?
Yeah, the interim measures, the court has this power to issue what's a bit like an injunction, you might say, in equivalent in the domestic court system. So it is a binding order, binding legal order, on which it can direct to any parties to a case. And it's done that in the Ukraine versus Russia case. It's directed the Russians to stop targeting individual civilians and also civilian objects. It's binding as a matter of law on Russia. Whether it's had any effect at all, I think it's impossible to say. We might say it's have had no effect at all. So there's been non-compliance, as there's been non-compliance with the provisional measures indication by the International Court of Justice. On the other hand, I think it's extremely important that these courts are able to and do issue these kind of orders. I think they're important symbolically. They're important actually also, I think, for the future, when there is the opportunity and the time to investigate human rights violations, international humanitarian law violations of the Rome Statute and so on. When in the future that happens, these provisions and if they're being blatantly not implemented, this will be part of the investigation process. I think that's hugely important.
So are there investigations going on now?
Well, yeah, the International Criminal Court is investigating. That process is opened, and they've in fact invited people to send evidence and make submissions. They've opened a portal on their website even to do that. So that's going ahead. Of course, some people would question the utility of all of this, while the war goes on, and question whether it's had any impact at all on Russia. And I think those questions, of course, are valid questions, and they're right to be raised. And I think it's true that there is a lot of there's no question of effective compliance at the moment. But for the reasons I said earlier, I do think they're important, nevertheless, as markers, as important that states like Ukraine and other states are using the international legal system even in the context of military invasion.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any scenario in which Russia might return to the Council of Europe?
Well, it won't happen clearly for a while, but of course it's entirely possible. It happened with Greece, as I mentioned earlier, in the 60s and early 70s, when there was a change of government. So I wouldn't expect to see it unless there is a change of government. But I think the Council of Europe will certainly be open to that, as we would all to see Russia as a democratic country complying with the rule of law to rejoin the international community when the time is right.
At the present time, is there some sense in which Russia's expulsion might have a positive impact on the court, given that Russia was one of the worst states for executing the decisions of the court and is now left?
Well, I think there are different consequences. The Council of Europe will lose the Russian financial contribution, of course, which is significant. But on the other hand, it will the weight of cases will be reduced. As I said, there were until recently there were 18,000, and I last looked 18,000 Russian cases pending, which is the most from any of the Council of Europe states. In some ways, some people would say that the decision to expel Russia perhaps adds legitimacy to the Council of Europe because it's acted in a way some people would say that is needed in the current situation. It's an appropriate response to Russia's illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. So it may have the effect in some ways of sort of enhancing the legitimacy of the system. We may, to some extent, we're perhaps seeing states readdressing the sort of international rules-based order, reconsidering it, reapplying it. We're realizing how important the rule of law is in the face of such a flagrant denial of the rule of law.
And so my last question to you is, what do you see as the future for those human rights lawyers that have seen the European Court as a lifeline to real legal reform in Russia? I mean, there are many people who have spent many years using the court as a way, and with good results, with tangible results. So what do you see as the future for these people, these human rights defenders and lawyers?
Well, the immediate future looks incredibly bleak because, of course, as you know very well, Mary, prior to the invasion, what we've seen in Russia has been a very brutal repression of the human rights community and of course, political opposition. In terms of what we've seen, the treatment of Alexei Navalny and his organizations and supporters and so on, not to mention the execution of Boris Nemtsov, and the wider treatment of human rights community, human rights defenders, the foreign agents law, the recent decision to liquidate Memorial. All of those things and many others means that the climate for active human rights defense in Russia has got progressively worse and worse. The authorities are acting incredibly repressively. So it's a very bleak picture, to be frank, Mary. And I think the invasion has significantly worsened the situation. I know many people have left Russia. So it's a very, very worrying, concerning, and depressing, bleak picture. Now, one has to look ahead, if that's possible, as you said, to a time when Russia could possibly re-enter the Council of Europe. What the Russian lawyers have achieved, what the work that's been achieved through the European Court and other international bodies to date is out there. It's a matter of record. All the violations in Chechnya, the several hundred judgments from the European Court of Human Rights in relation to violations by the Russian security forces in Chechnya and the North Caucasus, they're out there. They're a hugely important body of record that can be used in the future. And so I think we do have to look with some hope to a future period where Russia rejoins and is as a democratic state that respects the rule of law, and that's what we must hope for and look to.
Well, our time is up, so we must bring our interview to a close. I want to thank you for joining us today and lending us the benefit of your considerable expertise during this dark time.
Thank you, Mary. It's been a great pleasure.
Best wishes for your future work with the European Court of Human Rights, and we hope to see you again on Rights in Russia and on a better day.
Thank you, Mary. I hope so too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.